Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining my session on earning links at scale by using newsworthy content. My name is Amanda Milligan. I am the head of marketing at Stacker Studio, and I love talking about this topic. So let's dive on in. But first, I just want to point out that my cat is a special guest. I don't know if you can see this void in the corner, but that is my cat Bagheera. So that just makes me happy that she's in the shot. All right, let's just get right to it. We have a lot to cover. So, like I said, my name is Amanda. I've been talking about newsworthy content, tangential content, which I'll get to, link-worthy content, earning links, all these topics for many years now. I've published articles about this stuff in a variety of places and spoken at various conferences. I'm really hoping that I can distill as much as I can in this half hour, but I do think that there will be questions at the end. So please feel free to ask, especially on the promotion side, because I know that that's where a lot of questions are. But for the purposes of this presentation, we're going to talk about the type of content that will be most likely to not only scale up your link earning strategies, but to get quality links. That's kind of a presupposed part of this presentation, is that you care about the quality of the links. So our strategy at Stacker Studio, we are a newswire that partners with brands to create content for them. And the way that we do it is through newsworthy content. That can mean a lot of things, right? And we're going to talk about how to break that down and think about what makes something newsworthy. But the reason we do this is because there's three primary benefits. You get high quality news pickups. So respected publications will be interested in what you're creating. You get the brand authority of creating content that is respected by these publications. The fact that they're talking about it kind of vouches for you and the quality of what you're creating. And also, because they're good publications, the links are inherently better. They're going to have higher domain authority or domain rating, whichever one you use, or however else you measure the quality of links. That could be a whole other presentation, but they're good links. So that's why we go the newsworthy route, and we encourage pretty much any brand to go this route, because it's not just about the links, it's about your reputation, it's about building trust, and it's all inherently packaged into this strategy. When I talked about authority, a big piece of this is literally how your brand is being mentioned in this type of coverage. So this is an example. I'm going to use our brand partner pin to illustrate a lot of the concepts I'll be talking about today. And in this example, the Buffalo News picked up one of the stories we wrote for them, and literally pin is the very first word with a link. Okay, you don't get things like this unless you're paying for them and there's a sponsor tag on it and it's no follow. I mean, this is wild. This is a follow link. This is so well positioned. It's pin being cited as the source of this information. They compiled the list that the article is about to dive into. The level of authority that's being built through this technique cannot be understated. And it often is, because authority is hard to measure, right? But I wanted to call this out as an example. If it's not the first word, it won't always be the first word. It's usually the first paragraph or first two paragraphs. Because what's going to happen here is if you're creating newsworthy content, your brand is being sourced as the citation for that content, right? So it's really important to note. Okay, so newsworthy content. I got a journalism degree, and I could do a whole separate talk on all the potential elements of newsworthy content. You have timeliness, right? Something that happened more recently. You have proximity. How close is something to you that makes you care about it more? That's why we do a lot of local content as well. Novelty, is it something that's never happened before? Again, that could be a whole separate presentation. For our purposes, I want to talk about three things that work extremely well for us and that you can apply to your content strategy tomorrow. So those three things are tangential content, which I'll define in a moment, data-focused content, which is a fundamental foundation of pretty much everything we do, and contextualized content. And if you're able to remember these three things after this presentation and incorporate them into how you create content, you will be in a great place. So Let's start with tangential content. I like to think of tangential content as zoomed out. So the word tangential kind of means like somewhat related to the core topic, right? When it comes to content creation, I think zooming out is the best way to visualize this in your mind. So if we're thinking about the range here, more topical. So on the topical side of the spectrum, you're talking about like your actual product or service, right? That's really on topic. That's bottom of the funnel stuff typically. And maybe like your company culture, things just like really relevant to just you as a company. You know, talking about your values or benefits you offer is not going to be super interesting to a wide audience, right? But it could be very interesting to your company and your customers, right? Whereas if you go to the more tangential side of things, the closest thing to your company you could include is maybe your mission, but even that, I mean your broad mission, not like you're very specific what you're trying to solve for your product, for your customers or clients, but more like, why do you exist as a company? What do you hope to do for the industry at large? Where do you see the industry at large going? That kind of broad level of a mission. Your industry. So this is how you can zoom out. Instead of talking about just your product or service, now you're thinking about the scope of your entire vertical, the arena that you play in. And when you're doing more tangential content, you're definitely thinking about a more general audience. You're not thinking about specifically your target audience. However, you do want a general audience that would include your target audience. And the reason for this is that when you're able to overlap more of the like tangential side, like your overall brand mission and newsworthy elements, you're able to create the best kind of content you can for earning links. That's the caveat, because the stuff on the left here is extremely valuable, just not as much for earning links. You need it to convert, right? But that's not what we're talking about in this presentation. So I don't want it to be a topical versus tangential, what content is best conversation. I want it to be, you need all of these in your funnel. And if you're trying to build links and awareness, then we need to be playing in the side of tangential content as well. So let's look at an example. Redfin has a great content program. So I just pulled some examples from this. I use these a lot. On the left side, we have more topical. So it makes total sense for them to do a rental market tracker to talk about mortgages and rent costs. That makes a lot of sense with their brand and aligns really well. On the right side, they're still talking about where you live. So they're zoomed out, and now they're just in the realm of where people live and why. And they did a study that definitely appeals to a more broad audience, at least in my opinion, right? On the left, it might be people who are interested in moving or buying or renting, okay? On the right, they've zoomed out, they've taken a political angle, a more just hard news angle. That will appeal to a wider audience. So in that way, it's more newsworthy to me. I think the left one's actually newsworthy as well, just for a more narrow audience. So this is just an example of how, think about a broader approach you can take. Instead of thinking, okay, only mortgage prices, maybe think of, okay, why do people choose where they live, right? Outside of cost. That's zooming out. So back to brand partner PIN, because like I said, I'm going to use them a lot today. They work in the realm of employee communications. They're an employee comms tool. So they can create content specifically around communicating between employees, right? And setting up that infrastructure. However, when we're tasked to come up with tangential pieces that we want to syndicate to our news network, we have to zoom out first. So employee communications, if we're thinking broader, company culture, right? Communication is a huge part of company culture, and company culture can encompass a lot of stuff outside of communication. So that's an example of broadening. Also, workplace productivity. If you're talking about employee communications, usually that has to do with making sure that things are efficient and you're talking to who you need to talk to, when you need to talk to them to get the information you need, right? A broader bucket would be employee and workplace productivity. So we've zoomed out. We have these two new buckets to work with. The next part of the exercise is to zoom back in. So, for example, on the company culture side, transparency has been a big topic recently. I've seen it on LinkedIn and in articles, whether it's putting the salary for job postings, whether it's, leadership talking more candidly about how the business is performing with staff, whatever it is, transparency has been a really interesting topic, right? Company culture can also talk about work friends, right? And that has to do with employee communications, but it's just a little bit of a different approach. What do work friendships look like? How are they good? How do you need to navigate them carefully? Whatever the topic is, that could be a really interesting concept to work with. On the right side, we're talking about workplace productivity. Another thing that comes up all the time is the 4-day work week. That has been a really trendy topic, discussing how can you actually set up how people work, how often they work to improve morale and productivity. You can talk about something like time tracking, which is also, kind of a controversial thing. But those are all kind of like more specific categories within productivity. And then we have remote work, which fits under both of these buckets, which is also obviously because of COVID become extremely relevant to basically everyone, whether you're able to remote work or not, you have an opinion on it. So you'll see that a lot of the examples I include are actually remote work for PIN because we have found it to be so successful. But I encourage you to try this zooming out and zooming back in exercise to broaden the types of ideas that you can use when creating content, either for yourself or for a client. So here's an actual example that we created for PIN. 10 aspects of remote work employers and employees disagree on. Okay. It's not specifically about internal business communication, right? We're talking about remote work that is not specifically about what PIN offers, but it is about their general industry. It appeals to a more general readership, and it's still interesting to their target audience, right? Because it's kind of inherently interesting to most of us. They also include, we also included this kind of like employer voice versus employee juxtaposition that hadn't been out really in the news yet. So adding this other layer of comparison, which we'll touch on soon. So this piece did really well. We got like 140 plus more follow links that all had a domain rating of at least 50. So we got more than that, but just for domain rating of 50 or more, we got more than 100 pickups, including like the Chicago Tribune and the Baltimore Sun, which are obviously really respected publications. So tangential content can be extremely useful. We use it all the time. Highly encourage you to use it. The second component is data-focused content. This is another tenet of what we do at Stacker. It always is kind of like hard to talk about the state of news right now because I think we all feel how difficult it is to contend with the information that's out there that is inaccurate, that is deceiving people, that is making people lose trust in the news. This is information from Gallup that shows that America's trust in mass media is the lowest since 2016. And as you can see from the graph, it's like the second lowest it's been since 1997. So we're not in a great spot in terms of trust with readers. And that's why it's everyone's responsibility, publishers' responsibility, and also brands' responsibility to make sure that everything we're publishing is objective, accurate, fact-checked, not positioned, not spun in a way to improve sales, that we're actually creating content that adds value and that can be trusted. The second you betray that trust, then you're contributing to this trend and people will not want to trust you again. They just won't. So this is why data-focused content can be a great strategy. Because if you're using data, you're already telling a more original novel story. If you're analyzing a new data set or analyzing it in a way that hasn't been explored before, it will most likely be newsworthy. Data can unveil interesting trends, and tell new stories. It could be broken down demographically, so you can explain things that are happening in different countries or states or age groups. But the final point here is that it adds immediate credibility. And we actually do this when we create headlines. We'll say what the source was in the headline even, because that's how much it's important to explain that you're not just making a claim or stating an unchecked fact, that you can say where this is coming from. You want a publisher and their readers to know, like this, where this information is coming from. That's what data can communicate much faster than anything else. The good news is there's a ton of free data sources out there if you're new to this work. The government, the US government, has a ton of stuff. I'm sure other governments do too. I just don't know off the top of my head. But if you're doing this for the first time, you haven't created a lot of content like this, start with the free government data, play around with it. There's probably something relevant to your industry or something that you can pair with another data set that would be really interesting for your industry, or even just to get a sense of what's out there. Highly recommend checking on. These are some of the ones that we use a lot. Definitely worth looking into. For PIN, and I'm going to show you an example of what I was talking about. The most important well-being programs according to workers. So in this headline, we are already mentioning the citation, the source, right? And that is based on a third-party data set. So when you go into the story, you'll be able to see, oh, this is from a study that was done, a credible source, and we're pointing to that in the headline. So this piece also did really well, more than 200 do follow links that had a domain rating of 50 plus. It was on Cron, MSN, other respected publications. Again, because people could read this headline and be like, okay, this isn't somebody's personal opinion about the most important well-being programs. This isn't a columnist or something. This is actually based on a study of workers and finding out what they think, which is more relevant to a piece like this. Finally, contextualized content. So the best situation is if you can do all of these at once. If you could be tangential, data focused, and contextualizing, then you're going to knock it out of the park. But let me talk about what contextualized content means. Essentially, it serves us to remember that we are not breaking the news as brands. We don't serve that role. That's what journalists are there for. And journalists also obviously add a ton of context to stories, but sometimes we can assist in providing additional angles that they can use to bolster the work that they're already doing. The way to do this is to think about trending topics that are probably already being covered in the news. And instead of being like, oh, that's been talked about, ask yourself a variety of questions. So what is the history of this topic? How does it compare to similar things? And how does it compare to different things? I'm going to give an example of this so that it makes a little more sense, but this is still a handy post-it to have on your desk as a reminder of how to frame some of your brainstorms around topics that you think have been covered a lot. So we've been talking about the business vertical, and you can think about this. Starting a business, right? For the history aspect, how much does it cost to start a business now versus 10 years ago versus 100 years ago? I have no idea. I might see a headline that says this is how much it costs to start a business and have no clue how that has differed from the past. So that could be an interesting way to explore this, right? It's not necessarily just a timeline of this is when things happen when, but you can use data if you had a data set that showed the average cost of starting a business over years and see where those trends are, right? What does that mean about business owning today? Comparing to similar things. When you're starting a business, how much does it compare, or how does it differ to start a business in other states versus your own? How is it different to start a business in this country versus another country? Or how much does it cost to start like a boutique in your community versus a construction company? So these are comparing similar things. You're picking a category, maybe demographically, geographically, you know, the type of what you're talking about, again, to give you context, because not all businesses are equal. So you can take a statistic like this is how much it costs to start a business and ask yourself, okay, but how does that start to break down depending on the type of business? That's an example of comparing similar things. Comparing different things. So you have the cost of starting a business. What if you juxtapose that with the average loans that are being taken out by business school students or people getting their MBA? What would that look like? And what would that imply about the lives of people who are trying to start businesses and going to school for it, to making that decision? So as you can see, these are all completely different angles of the same general topic of the cost to start a business. But in pursuing this path of brainstorming, you're able to tap into other angles that could very well complement stories that are already in the news, right? And that's something that we did again. We talked about remote work before. And in this case, we talked about how different generations feel about remote work. So in that first piece, we were contextualizing too by comparing employees versus employers. Now we're looking at different generations because they probably don't all feel the same, right? So we compared each generation with the other and added a little more nuance to a conversation that was happening all over the internet about whether remote work is a good, quote unquote, good or bad thing. Now we're diving in a little bit more to see, okay, what about people who are just getting into the workforce versus people who've been in the workforce for a long time, right? Like how do their opinions differ? Again, got picked up in a ton of places with high domain rating because we were able to tap into a few of these things, these elements that we've talked about today. I wanted to include this quote from one of our publishing partners because I think that it really tells the story that I'm trying to get at about context. So they run a lot of our content, a lot of Stacker's content. And you see the quote here, it bolsters their original content. So they take our content and publish it and then use it to make the content that they've published relevant again, to pull back the stories they've already talked about and bring them back into the conversation through our contextualized pieces. So not only are they hoping to get engagement and traffic from what they're republishing from us, but also to leverage that to get traffic and engagement on the pieces they've already published that are topically relevant. As marketers, as content producers, we need to be thinking about the publisher. If our goal is for them to cover what we're creating, we need to remember what they're trying to achieve with that content. And if we're able to do that, if we are able to have the mindset of let's contextualize in order to complement what they're already publishing, we're in the right headspace to come up with the right kind of ideas. Okay, so if you're able to create tangential, data-focused, contextualized content, what does it do for you? Does it work? This is basically our model, but I do want to have a pretty major caveat. The SEO puzzle is, in my opinion, three major components, right? The link earning that we're talking about today is one component. The others are that your website is technically SEO sound, so that the structure of your site is well established, that all the internal linking is correct, that all of your pages can be correctly crawled, all of that is already in place, and that your on-site content is well developed for the user, that you've created all of that bottom of the funnel content we mentioned at the top of the presentation, so that when you're earning links, you're able to bolster everything else that you've done, rather than earning links to a site that's not ready to benefit from all those authority signals. So I just wanted to make that caveat because this whole process won't work for you unless you've already done these other two things, that your site is killer and your content is killer. Then it's time to start earning those great links to increase your chances of ranking for the content that you've created on your site. But for PIN, here are the top level results that we've gotten for them so far. So around 1,300 media pickups, average domain rating of 57. I'll just leave it at that. And you see how many of them have a domain rating of over 50. And then we do a total effective cost per link. I don't love talking about this because I don't want anyone to ever think about links as something you can pay for individually, because that's not how this works. And any of you watching who work in earning links will understand that. But sometimes to communicate this to people who aren't familiar, if you've been looking to hire a link earning vendor, you may have been used to seeing it this way because some people pitch it to you this way, especially people who are doing it like the old school Black Hat way. But this is to illustrate that if you do this through the newsworthy content approach, your cost per link is not going to be high because you're able to get enough pickups to distribute the cost. So the way that this works, at least in our case, is that our newsroom creates a story for one of our brand partners and publishes it on our brand partner's website, right? So they have the story that we wrote for them on their website. We syndicate that through stacker.com because, like I said, we're a newswire. So we publish it on stacker.com, and then we syndicate it out to our news network. And then that's where it gets picked up 100, 200, 300 times through our news network. It's earned syndication. We're not paying for any of it. So in this case, if you have the story on your site and you're doing more pitching type work, that kind of promotion, this would be the part where you're manually pitching and emailing publishers, writers, editors, if they'd like to cover your story. So those links, if they do pick up your story, that come back to your site, that's where all the link equity comes in. In our case, because it's a newswire, we are also dabbling in canonicals. It's not duplicate content because the canonicals are set up appropriately to point back to our brand partner site, but those are also authority signals. So the equity that comes from canonicals and links is all pointing at your page where the story lives on your brand site, saying all of these publications liked our content and published it in some capacity. The other key to making the most of this is to utilize some internal linking from that story to other high value pages on your site. Then you're distributing that link equity through the site to pages that you're really hoping to rank. If you have any questions on this, please ask them, because I know that this is something I can talk more about. This is what we did for many of our clients. This is pins, link results. You can see how dramatically that trend started to go up, just the links that they've earned. Their domain rating began to increase as a result of this work, which makes sense because if you're getting all of these authority signals from high authority publications, that's going to indicate that you know what you're talking about and that your site has quality content. When those things happen, then your pages start increasing in ranking. And I want to pause and explain that I have these results in this order for a reason, because they build on one another. As you build links and increase your domain rating, you start to see the pages that you already had on your site begin to increase in their rankings because you've used that internal linking to distribute that link equity. And now these pages are more authoritative and they're more likely to rank for their respective keywords. So you can see how these trends kind of overlap, but they don't happen simultaneously. And you won't see your organic pages start to increase in rankings, in month 1, for example. And then lastly, as those organic pages start increasing in their rankings, your traffic begins to go up because those rankings have improved. So that is the order in which you can expect these results to start kicking in, but it works. If you're patient and you put in the work and you say, we're going to create content that is legitimately newsworthy and good, this is the sequence of how these things unfold. This is how we report back to our brand partners of, okay, at first we're tracking the earned links, or then we're tracking the authority of your site, then we're tracking the keyword changes, and then we're tracking the organic traffic. They don't all happen simultaneously. They build on each other, and it continues to build. They all complement, they all uplift everything that's happening. The more you do this work, the better. It's not as effective if you do it in a one-off capacity, but if you invest in this as your growth strategy, you can see very impressive results. So I talked for a while and I talked very quickly. Please let me know if you have any questions. It has been a pleasure to give this presentation to you all today, and I so much appreciate you stopping by to watch it. If you have any questions after this presentation later and you think of them, please feel free to email me at amilligan@stacker.com or follow me on Twitter. I've had the handle on the bottom, but it's Millanda, Millanda. You can DM me there. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. But thank you so much.